It is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome our keynote speaker. Each year, CARP invites a political heavyweight to address a key group of our CARP volunteers who represent our 300,000 members through our network of chapters from coast to coast. I believe this is his first visit to the Zoomerplex, but I trust not his last, here in our new BC office and hopefully at our chapters as well. And as a note to our guest, I can tell you that the last party leader to address our meeting is now our Prime Minister. Andrew Scheer is the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. He was first elected Member of Parliament for Regina-Capel in 2004 by defeating the longest-serving member of the House of Commons. He's been re-elected 4 times, held the position of Speaker of the House of Commons from 2011 to 2015, becoming the youngest Speaker in Canadian history. After the 2005 election, Andrew served as the official opposition House Leader before successfully seeking the Conservative leadership. Andrew studied history and politics at the University of Ottawa and the University of Regina. He passed the Canadian Accredited Insurance Broker Program and began his working career in the insurance industry in Regina. And our Regina chapter will be thrilled to know that. As a father of 5, Andrew has been known all his life for being true to his conservative principles in politics and out. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Scheer. I'll come back once we're done to clarify the questions.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for allowing me to come and visit with you and share a few words. I saw a couple of people kind of make a reaction when they said that I had 5 children, and I understand why. For those of you that have large families yourselves, you'll know it's not easy, especially in this day and age. We started having children rather young. I was 24 when I got married, started having kids almost right away, and it just so happened that it was about every election time. I've been elected 5 times, and we had 5 kids. So either right around the time or the lead up or just after, we were always expecting or having a new one. So when I decided to run for the leadership, Jill, my wife, said to me right away, said, okay, well, if you run, just so you know, this doesn't count as an election for the other purposes. I want to say what a thrill it is for me to be here, and as the MC mentioned, you know, if this is the rite of passage for a future Prime Minister, then I'm happy to do it, and I'd love to come back as often as I can to make sure that happens. Being in opposition, you may find that a lot of my remarks are talking about what we believe the government's doing wrong. I hope you don't think that's partisan. It is a little bit. We have a partisan nature in our Parliament, and where I am at in my leadership right now with the party is we are in the listening phase. You know, we lost the last election. We lost it for a reason. Canadian people decided to go with something else. Then we had an interim leader and then a leadership process. And what my job, I believe, in the next few months is to find out what it was that we did wrong. Why did Canadians lose confidence in us in general? We retained our vote. A lot of our MPs that lost their seat actually got a higher vote total than they did in 2011. But a whole lot of other people came out and voted, and they didn't vote for us. So that's the lesson that we need to learn. I'm here today primarily to send a signal that the issues facing seniors in Canada, specifically our relationship with CARP, is important. It's important to me as leader of the party. It's important to our members, and we want to hear from you. We want to hear what it is that we could be doing better. What are the types of policies that fit within the conservative principles that we could focus on, that we could offer going into the next election, so that all Canadians, but specifically today talking about seniors issues, can resonate. So I want to talk a little bit about our record. I was very proud to be in part of a government that did have a strong focus on seniors issues. We had a specific cabinet minister. We had a Secretary of State for seniors, a position that the Liberal government has eliminated. We brought in all kinds of flexibility, we increased flexibility for retirement savings in the way that people use and access their own savings. I think that the tax-free savings account is one of the most innovative saving tools ever. I was very sad to see that the contribution limit was cut. And that was something that our former Finance Minister Jim Flaherty was also very proud of. We know that there are a lot of issues facing seniors that are particularly of concern because of the reduced flexibility that individuals have as they get older to adapt to market forces. When costs go up for someone who's still on the front end of their earning years, there's lots of things that people can do to adjust. You can work longer hours, you can take extra training to get a better position, you can invest in your small business and expand and compensate for that. You can make other choices that as you get older, we know it's just that much more difficult. To put my own personal story out there to provide some context, my parents had me when they were a little bit older, and so as a result, my father retired years ago. My mother was a nurse for over 20 years at the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario and had a lot of health problems in the later years of her life. She ended up being in palliative care for a while and then lived in a care home. And one of the things that struck me was being on fixed incomes as those costs went up. She had was a kidney transplant recipient, a lot of supplies that go along with that. Those aren't cheap. You think to yourself of, she ended up having to have a colostomy and just the supplies for that. And my dad would show me the bills. My dad is always kind of showing me some of the impacts of things, and he would go over the bills for some of the supplies and the caps on what was eligible within his own private pension, what was covered by OHIP. That adds up. And my mom was never going to be able to work again, and my dad had some health problems as well. The ability for him to go back in the workplace and do anything to compensate for that, every time those costs went up, it had a direct impact on the quality of life. It meant that they had to cut back somewhere else. And as they got older, that produced a lot of anxiety for them. So I have a tremendous amount of sympathy for that aspect of things, that when costs go up, when services get delisted, when inflationary pressures mean the staples of life, the must-haves get more expensive, the demographic that has perhaps the least ability to be flexible and adapt for that are seniors, people who don't have that ability to go back out into the workforce. So one of the things I think Conservatives need to do a better job at is explaining why we believe in what we believe in. So when we fight against higher taxes, it's not just because we're philosophically and ideologically opposed to taxes, although we are, higher taxes anyway, but it's because we know that there's a direct impact on human beings. When a carbon tax gets imposed, as it's coming, that will increase the cost of home heating, that will increase the cost of hydro, energy, power. That money has to come from somewhere for individuals, and so particularly for seniors. I've heard tons of stories. My family's from Mississauga. They grew up here. My mom grew up there. I have tons of cousins and aunts and uncles. And the stories about Ontario hydro rates, at first I didn't believe them. I thought, no, they couldn't be going up by 100% or 80%. And then people would just take a picture of their bill and send it to me. I thought, oh my gosh, that's actually the case. Well, to be on a fixed income, when those hydro rates go up 43%, CPP isn't going up by 43%. If you're fortunate to be on a defined benefit pension plan, that's not being adjusted to inflation at that rates. So these are real dramatic effects on the quality of life for human beings, people in our community, people who have worked so hard and contributed to the society that they live in and the economy. I had a policy plank in my leadership campaign that I'm hoping I can get the rest of my caucus and party behind. And that is the idea that, when the GST and HST is applied to different things in life, there has always been a principle that it isn't applied to essentials. The groceries are exempt from GST and HST because it's an essential. Medication is exempt from that because it's an essential. It's usually only applied to the things that you would more consider luxuries or the things that you don't absolutely have to have. Well, I believe that in Canada, certainly in most of it, with all due respect to our friends from the beautiful parts of British Columbia where you only have to heat your home perhaps 6 or 8 weeks a year. But for the vast majority of Canadians, it's pretty darn cold a lot of the year. And I don't believe that heating your home or keeping your fridge running should be treated as a luxury. I believe that's an essential. And I promise to remove the HST and GST from home energy. And that's a policy that that I would be very proud to implement. I know that's something that CARP has, in general terms, advocated for as well. We believe in income splitting for seniors. It was one of the signature policy pieces of our government back in the 2006-2008 term. Something I was very proud to see. It's something that really assisted a lot of seniors across Canada to be able to reduce their tax share by splitting their income. It's something I'm worried about. I don't believe the Liberal government supports it in principle. I think that if they don't do anything on it, it will only be because of the political backlash that they may face. But all the rhetoric they talk about, I don't think they believe in it philosophically. When you look at everything they talk about, especially recently with the attack on small business, and for anyone who has had a small business in their life, you'll see it. It's all about taking things away from people. It's all about tearing people down. If a group or an individual or a certain type of person in Canada has an advantage, if there's a disparity, the Liberal answer is to always take that away from someone. The Conservative answer is always to share that with other people. And so we look at something like pension splitting, and we hear it. We heard in the House of Commons from the Liberals and the NDP saying, well, not everyone can qualify for pension splitting, so it's not fair. Say, okay, well, then what are some other things we can do to benefit people who may not benefit from pension splitting? What are the types of things that we could do for others? Let's not take it away from people that enjoy it, that help, that benefit from it, that have a better quality of life because of it. Let's look at things that we can do to lift all people up. The same issue, I mean, I can run down the list. We brought in pension tax credit, seniors tax credit. We expanded that. We brought in tax credits for single seniors who couldn't benefit from pension splitting. We brought in a tax credit for them. So I believe we had a very strong record on that. Another disturbing thing that I think a lot of people, especially seniors, should be concerned about is the changes that the Liberals have made through the Canada Revenue Agency about how the disability tax credit is being administered and managed. And I got to tell you, it was mentioned, I had my start in the insurance industry. And this is a knock on the insurance industry from time to time. Different companies come under scrutiny for the idea that you can reduce your costs if you make qualification harder. So there's a lot of stories out there about underwriting companies who will have a default position of denying a claim and putting that onus back on the person making the claim to appeal or to provide for information because they know that a significant percentage of them won't bother or it'll be too hard, and so they can reduce their costs. Well, we're seeing that now with our own Canada Revenue Agency with the disability tax credit. It came to light just a few weeks ago that people with type 1 diabetes who had always qualified for it, now they're having to provide almost proving that they actually have to treat their disease. And if they meet some bureaucratic definition of some threshold, only then will they qualify for something that they have benefited from for years and years. It's coming to light in the last few days that this is also being applied to people with intellectual disabilities, people with autism, people who have suffered other types of debilitating diseases or conditions that technology has mitigated. I'm sure living with type 1 diabetes is easier today than it was 40 years ago with the advances in technology, but for heaven's sake, we can't. I don't accept the fact that the government can determine that there's no need for an extra bit of support as people go through the very real problems managing that disease. So it's a direction that I think the Liberals are taking the government. It's very bureaucratic. It's very cold. It's what you get when you allow departments to just look at the letter of the law or the letter of regulations and then don't put that human filter in things. And that's what the Conservative Party has been fighting for over the last few weeks, is to keep that compassionate side through our tax system and not allow it to be used like a cold, hard, bureaucratic bean counter. We need to reduce our liability over here, so we're going to make this harder to qualify for. So I believe that a lot of the issues that come up can transcend demographic lines. There's a lot of conversation. I just got asked a question about whether or not the fact that all three party leaders now are younger, the fact that young people voted at record levels in the last election, will that mean that there will be a shift away from seniors issues and now a greater focus on issues affecting young people? I don't believe that is a binary option. I believe that a lot of the issues facing young people also touch on seniors as well. I saw it myself, being a young person, but having parents that needed that bridge support in later years of life. That's something that young people are concerned about, but it's also something that seniors are concerned about. And we can find the solutions to those types of challenging issues if we have that positive attitude, if we have that attitude of not pitting one group of Canadians against the other, not dividing Canadians along ethnic, regional, or demographic lines, but saying these are issues that we need to work at together. And we have enough in this country. We're a prosperous enough country. We're a country that's capable of addressing these issues in a way that we don't have to create losers in order to create winners. We can have that kind of approach where we can be united on these fronts. So I'm mostly here to listen, but I wanted to paint that kind of a sketch about what are the conservative principles that will be guiding us in our conversations. We want to have increased security for seniors. We want to have retirement security, pension security, higher quality of life. We want to help seniors be independent for as long as possible. And at the end of the day, make sure that whatever we do is never done with the lens of tearing anybody down. We want to build people up. So thanks very much for allowing me to share that vision with you.
Thank you, Andrew. A number of our chapter we're going to swap sides. I'm just getting the cue here. A number of our chapter folks have asked to be able to ask you a question. So I'm going to start in our capital city with Rick Baker from our Ottawa chapter. Would like to ask you something.
Welcome, Mr. Scheer. This past Wednesday, as you're probably aware, CARP was involved with probably close to 70 members of Parliament in focusing on a very, very critical issue in our country. And it's about super priority status for pensioners in corporate defined benefit programs. Can you tell us what you would do to better protect the 1.3 million Canadians whose corporate pensions are at risk?
I can use these ones, or yeah? Use the podium, okay. Thank you for the question. I can tell you in general terms, I'm very sympathetic to the plight of people who have given years of their life and have counted on a support being there for them that in many cases is significantly funded by their own money, that it was money that was deducted from their paycheck. It was a part of the agreement that they entered into when they started working for a company, that they would allow that to be deducted to go into a fund on the condition that it was there for them when they retired. And any employer contribution was also part of the agreement. It was part of the deal, so to speak. My dad worked for the Ottawa Citizen for years and years and years. We all know the state of print journalism in Canada, the newspaper industry. And there are a lot of unfunded pension liabilities out there for a lot of companies that are currently going through a very significant period of transition. So I know that it would be very, very difficult and almost impossible for him to go back into the workforce if that rug got pulled out from him. If that agreement that he made when he started working was now broken. And so I can say in general terms, I am very sympathetic to the issue. And although I'm not in a position to make a policy announcement or a commitment, I want to say I have a very personal understanding of the situation. And I believe that the Government of Canada needs to do more to protect pensions and retirement income from people who have operated their entire working life on the assumption that that agreement would be held up. So I want to thank you for raising it, and I hope to be able to come back at a later date with some more specifics around it. But that is something I'm very, very sympathetic to.
Well, delighted to hear of your sympathy for the position, and we'd be happy to provide you with any information we could to get your support, and perhaps have you introduce the idea that this be studied in committee. I'll look forward to working with you offline on that. Daria, just behind you, Elizabeth, if you could.
Yes, good morning. This next question is about caregivers. Caregivers are now entitled to a non-refundable family caregiver tax credit, but this means that only those who pay taxes can benefit. Those who are the most in need of relief, individuals on low incomes, or those who have had to completely give up their employment entirely to provide care, receive no benefit. Will you commit to extend to those without income some type of caregiver allowance and or caregiver income?
I find that to be a very interesting proposal. And I think that one of the things the Conservative Party has always been about is the flexibility. And sometimes when policies are designed in Ottawa, it doesn't capture every dynamic. And I know firsthand there are many situations where the situation you described is exactly what happens. And the care that is provided by a family member or a loved one or a close, someone who's close to that person often alleviates a cost to the public system. And we're often saving the system much more than is being provided in terms of tax support. When you think about the cost for an hourly cost for a home visit or for some of the services that can be provided. So again, without being able to make a specific announcement, because we are a few years away from election, we have to cost everything out and that type of thing. Again, I want to indicate that I have a tremendous amount of sympathy for that position as well, and that more than sympathy, I do think it's the type of thing that the government should look at to be more flexible. That when we roll out, in principle, having a tax credit for caregiving makes sense if it's designed in too of a bureaucratically tight way that's not capturing every dynamic. Government should be flexible. We shouldn't say, well, sorry, you don't fit into this exact box, so therefore you get nothing. We could say, okay, well, how can we expand that? How can we extend that in a way that's sustainable? Always understanding that in many of these situations, governments save much more than it costs. When people do it out of the goodness of their heart or out of love or out of a family connection, it's always cheaper than running it through a publicly run, government-run, bureaucratic. I mean, anybody here has any kind of experience with home care. I don't want to go on a rant, but I sat beside a lady last night at a fundraising dinner who is really involved in the home care side of things, and the bureaucratic levels that exist. She told me a story about a person who had a home visit to help her with a bath, and she said by the time she filled out all the forms and made all the phone calls, she could have had 8 baths, and all the costs that go into that, when that can be provided by a close friend, family, or loved one. There's all kinds of savings there that make the system better, and it's better for the person receiving the care too than to have a stranger come in and do it for them.
Great, thank you. That cost is actually $26 billion a year that informal caregivers provide to the care system, so we would love to follow up with that as well. On a different note, we have a question over here. Maybe just introduce yourself and ask the question.
Good morning, my name's Doug Martin from Calgary. So obviously a long-time progressive conservative supporter. So you talked earlier in your speech about retirement and pension security, and there's a lot of issues around longer longevity for people, and they're actually running out of savings. They're outliving their savings. Is the Conservative platform going to do anything around eliminating or reducing the mandatory RIF withdrawals?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because tying back into the flexibility argument and a line of thought on the small business tax changes that you may be following as well is the Liberal, I believe, a lack of understanding on behalf of the Liberal government that tax deferrals don't cost the government in the long run. And I think the RIFs is a perfect example of that. Eventually, the government gets the taxes that were due. So in a long term, if governments could move beyond the 4-year political cycle and looked at the long-term effects on government revenues, any kind of flexibility offered for RIFs doesn't actually cost the system that much money. So why not give that flexibility to seniors specifically? Why not let them manage that if at the end of the day the government gets the revenue anyway to be able to fund important services and that? Absolutely. We will be looking at, and our policy will be looking at, incentivizing people to save early on in life, make it easier for them to do that, both by reducing their income tax and personal tax load, but also savings tools like the tax-free savings account, like enhancements to RSPs and things like that, so that when people get to the end of their working career, there's less of a dependence on government, because governments have to make decisions and there's often strains on things, but the more that people are independently financially secure, the better it is for them, and then they're not subject to the political whims of one party or another. And the flexibility that can be built into that, I think, is essential. So yes, again, I indicate. Any of the questions say, "Will you commit today?" I'm gonna say no. I don't want to make commitments I can't keep. That's the type of person I am, and I did that all throughout the leadership campaign. We will have a fully costed budget. A fully costed campaign platform with specifics that all fit in together. And until I'm in a position to do that, I don't want to say yes for sure. We will commit to doing this. We're going to go through that process, but. In general, yes, I am in favor of enhanced flexibility, especially when it comes to your own money, especially when it comes to things like deferrals, because in the long run, it doesn't cost the system, it doesn't cost revenue to the Treasury.
Thanks for the question. And Andrew, I'm sure you heard when Doug asked it, the nods and the murmurs of assent throughout the group. And whenever we're speaking to CARP members, this is always a real hot button issue. So I really encourage you to put it in your campaign platform.
Well, I'll tell you what, when we are in a position to make specifics, I would love to come back and then start to go through some of the things that we are able to make a firm, rock solid commitment to going into the next election.
Sold. We will be delighted to host you. Have another question over here. Please just introduce yourself and where you're from.
I'm John Donewald from the poorest county in Ontario. What are the Conservatives going to do to tackle the issue of affordable, accessible housing for seniors?
Great question. There is a lot that is often focused on when it comes to the housing market for young couples entering the housing market for the first time. And that's important. It is important. We need to, you can't have security later on in life if you don't have it early on in life as well. But I do think that some of the conversation is missing the housing market for seniors. And especially when you get into unique, specialized circumstances, the lack of supply often makes the cost very, very high. So I know when my mom went into a Chartwell home in Ottawa, it was very expensive, and we did a lot of shopping around. And because there aren't a lot of options, there's a lot of demand for limited supply. So I think there's a lot that we can talk about. The demand side, there's a lot of we can talk about helping seniors save or accessing RSPs or RIFs, or there's a lot we can do on that side of things. But if we're not focusing on supply, if we're not also talking about how we can incentivize or encourage new units coming into the marketplace, we're only addressing half the problem. And the more demand you drive up, if there's still the same number of units, all you're doing is having more dollars chase higher prices. So you're not actually fixing the problem. So incentivizing development on seniors' facilities with a wide variety of options, because again, there's not one size fits all. There's different levels of care that people need. Some people just need a little bit of help. Some people need a lot of help. And some people need very qualified nursing services. Some people just need staff around the building to help with more minor things. So to have that built into the system where there is that flexibility and variance is something we will be looking at and offering to work seriously with the provinces who are the deliverers of that type of thing and manage most of that. But the federal government can provide that support and develop a framework that encourages the new inventory coming onto the market to help alleviate the costs.
We have another question from one of our West Coast folks. If you could introduce yourself and ask your question.
Ramona Captain from White Rock, Surrey, British Columbia. The Liberal government introduced legislation for medical assistance in dying that limited assistance to those whose deaths are imminent, in contradiction to the Supreme Court's decision. 83% of CARP members support assisted dying, MAID. Will you expand legislation to reflect the Supreme Court's decision and also allow people to request MAID by advance directive? Also supported by 83% of CARP members, as well as myself. This is very important to me, the advance directive.
Well, I appreciate that this issue is one that has a lot of sensitivities around it. People have passionate views on both sides. When the legislation came forward, we had a free vote because many in our caucus view this as a matter of conscience and have different perspectives, some based on personal convictions, some based on I think genuine societal concerns of this. Let me just say that it is still very early on in this new regime to be able to say with certainty how it's going. Some of the numbers are concerning. The numbers of people that have availed themselves of the now legal procedures around assisted suicide. And I can just say from my own perspective, this was something that I voted against the legislation. I have a personal position on this, one that is shared, I think, by many Canadians. So this may be one of those issues that you and I have a different perspective on. It's any changes around that, our caucus, our party, would always view as a matter of conscience, and we would have free votes on. We will wait and see how the courts deal with. I imagine there will be cases where people will seek to expand the parameters around the euthanasia regime that's been set up, and anything that Parliament has to respond to will always be done from our perspective as a free vote, reflecting the diversity of opinion on this and the rights of individual MPs to reflect their own personal conscience and the rights of and the positions of their constituents.
I'd just like to say, please, let's not call it assisted suicide, and let's not call it euthanasia. It's a choice. It's my choice as much as it's your choice. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. But if I want to do it, it should be my choice, my body. It's not suicide.
Well, I use that term because that was the term that was used for decades and decades, and it's what was in the criminal code. I know other people have other perspectives, and that's fine. You can call it whatever you'd like to do. I don't want to get focused on the language so much as I want to get focused on the concerns that have been raised and things like advance directives. It may very well be now legal for you to exercise that choice when the circumstances arise, but there are lots of concerns about those that feel that it wouldn't be a choice, that we need to make sure that people are being protected, not to be coerced, not to be, to have, when they make certain determinations, that they do it in a way that if they change their mind later on, or if other situations develop, and there are a lot of legitimate concerns that are raised on that. So before we talk about expanding the regime along this, we need to be very careful about how we handle this, because in many cases it's very hard to pull back, and we don't want to see some troubling trends if there are cases of abuse, or if there are cases where people find themselves in situations where their position has changed, or where what they would like has changed. And
so maybe
I'm saying it's so early on in the regime that before we talk about expanding it, I think we should take a look and see what's developing. Let's start hearing back from medical experts at the provincial level before we, it's still new. I mean, it's less than, it's only been enforced in the life of this Parliament.
I'll just stop us there. Perhaps we take this conversation offline.
Yeah, happy to follow up. Absolutely. I recognize that this is a position. Like I said, just to wrap it up on this, this is a thing that both sides of the issue have very legitimate positions based on either personal experience or their own deeply held convictions. So we will always approach that in that manner with great sensitivity and trying to find some points of commonality.
Okay, and I think we have time for one more question, if we could.
Thank you. Hi there. My name is Adina Lebeau, and this is an issue close to my heart as a single senior living in Toronto. There's been a recent increase to the guaranteed income supplement for most vulnerable senior citizens. And yet, many still continue to struggle and live well below the poverty line in urban areas like Toronto and Vancouver. And I know you're not making commitments today, but when you go back to do that budget, we would like to know, are you committed to increasing the GIS? And if so, by how much and when? Costs are going up, and incomes, as you know, are shrinking and fixed. So this is critical.
Yes. I can commit to take that issue very seriously and to make sure that we come up with a policy that speaks to that. The issue, I think, that doesn't get talked enough about is how governments, either purposefully or just with other policies, allow inflation to erode the savings and income levels of people on fixed incomes. And inflation erodes your ability to maintain that quality of life. You have no control over it. The Bank of Canada can raise or lower the rates, increase or restrict the money supply, and without you doing anything, your purchasing power, the savings that you have, and as people get older, they tend to put their savings in more stable vehicles. You know, you're not taking the same level of risk, so the returns tend to go down the older you get. So inflation becomes more and more of an issue, and it is in many cases a tax on savings, and the erosion of that is very real. And so when we look at indexing things, we have to make sure that it actually reflects the real inflation rate. And many times there's a lag, and the inflation rate and the cost of living, especially when inflation is calculated, it's often calculated on a huge variety of goods and services. But seniors tend to have a tremendous, a much less diversified cost burden. And so things like heating, utilities, medication, those matter more than, say, a brand new car or what it would cost to purchase some other things. So when we're looking at indexing retirement supports, I think we should calculate it on an inflation rate that's more practical for people that are relying on those supports.
Well, thank you. And that almost sounded like a commitment to a seniors price index, which we would be very excited to hear more about. So I think we'll leave it there, and please join me in thanking Andrew for joining us today and for such good skills.
Thanks very much.
So we're going to just take some photographs with our advocacy team. Mr. Scheer, if you could just step up here with Wanda. Yeah. Marissa, can you join us up here as well, please? They're all clear. So we'll get Andrew and Wanda first, please, if you guys. Get some shots. Marissa here. You jump in there now. Last, you want to be in the picture? We'll do all of us? Yeah. Okay, now Loss and I will jump in as well. Loss, come on, leave there.